Just 28 days ago, TCU and Georgia took the field in the 2023 College Football Playoff National Championship game. And even though it wasn't competitive, it still, like every national title game and like every New Year's Six or high caliber bowl matchup, was special because it signified the conclusion of the college football season, and we got to see a lot of great talent on the field. We got to see the birth of potentially a dynasty in Georgia, and even though the Cinderella story ended painfully for TCU, you just got to wonder if that semifinal win for TCU is going to give Sonny Dykes and his Horned Frogs momentum for the years coming. The 2022 college football season, of course, ended that 4 weeks ago. And 11 months from now, we will see the conclusion of the 2023 college football season in what will be the 2024 college football playoff. And today, I want to paint that picture for you. Not the picture per se of the whole season, though some of that will already be painted and colored in and drawn out due to the teams that I picked to go to the playoff, which we'll get to much later in this video. But first and foremost, I want to talk about teams that I think could actually contend for a playoff spot, because I think there are obviously more than four. I think that there are teams who are capable of going 15-0 and winning the national title. And then I think there are teams that they have a small chance at winning the national title, but they very well could win a semifinal game. So that right there is my bracket for what is an actual playoff contender. We're not talking about Notre Dame, who goes to the playoffs and gets blown out, or 2019-18 Oklahoma, or 2021 Cincinnati. We're not talking about those teams here. Or Michigan State, or Michigan in 2021. Those are not the teams we're talking about. We're talking about the teams who actually have a chance to, when facing elite college football playoff competition, win a semifinal game. TCU, despite not being talented and being less talented than the Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Michigan, and even Michigan State teams that I mentioned, would fit into this category. So there's a lot of margin for error, of course, because no one saw TCU being a legitimate college football playoff contender, and yet here we are. But it's still fun to talk about. I'm excited to talk about it, and I think a lot of these predictions, which will be subject to change, have a very good chance of hitting, because I think that 3 out of the 4 teams that I have in my way too early winner edition playoff bracket, I think 3 of them are very likely to make it. I'm very, like, 9 out of 10 confident that these 3 teams will reach the college football playoff. The 4th seed is always the trickiest, though. Please watch the entire video so that this video can get its way into the algorithm. Like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I encourage you to do so. I'm on a journey to reach 10,000 subscribers, at which point I will have a giveaway. I just really love this community, and subscribing to this channel and watching the whole video through allows me to keep doing what I am doing here. So join the awesome community. I'll really appreciate it, and please hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I release my way too early top 25, way too early conference predictions, specifically the Big Ten, and much more awesome college football content. Without further ado, let's get right into it and talk about what I was discussing in that short little introduction about the real college football playoff contenders. Teams who can, in this range, at least win a semifinal game, or they can go 15-0, solidify themselves as being one of the better teams in the history of the sport in between that range. And look, there's a lot of interpretation, especially when it comes to the lower end of the range of this list. You could make an argument that there are a lot more real college football playoff contenders than what I am listing. I'm going to go through some of the fakes, or who I think are the fakes, real quickly, and just talk about why I don't have them listed up there. USC It's year two. Alex Grinch exists. Lincoln Riley and his defense exist. You have Caleb Williams. You have an amazing wide receiver core. You have Raleek Brown and Marshawn Lloyd at running back and an okay offensive line. But I just don't think USC is the caliber of defense and the all-around physicality and mental toughness yet to win a playoff game. They could reach a college football playoff game, but could they win it? I don't think so. Another one's Texas. I think Texas is still in a rebuilding phase. Now, with the recruiting classes they have, with the way their defense operated this past season, and especially with how they're recruiting in the trenches, and they have the second best wide receiver core in the country, they're on the right track. I think Texas very well is on track to being back. Some days I go even as far to say that they are already back. But I just want to give it one more year. They still have more rooting out and weeding to do. But I do think there's a very good chance that they will win the Big 12. And right now, if I had to make a decision, I would pick Texas to win the Big 12. Oregon, probably in a similar position to USC, have great quarterback play. Their offense is phenomenal. Unlike USC, I actually think they're fixing some of their issues on defense, but it's year two. They had a plethora of issues on defense this past season, and they do have a tough schedule in the Pac-12. And just looking at how they played Georgia last year, I don't think that they're fit to take on an elite defense, and their defense certainly is not fit to take on an elite offense. Other teams might include, but I haven't heard so much hype around them. I think North Carolina could be one, and maybe Kansas State. Outside of that, I honestly like maybe Tennessee. But I think all the rest of the possible contenders that people have been talking about would be right up here in the real college football playoff contenders section. I have Washington, I have Penn State, I have Utah, Florida State, and Clemson. Now, Washington's interesting because they're in a similar situation to USC and Oregon, where their defense struggled mightily. But I think Kalen DeBoer is a great head coach. He's a winner. He has one of the best, winningest records as a college football head coach. Now, a lot of those wins are in lower division levels, but he had success at Indiana, brought Tom Allen success there, success at Fresno State. His first year in Washington, 11-2 season, beat the likes of Oregon, lost to Arizona State and UCLA, but beat every good team every solid team that Washington faced, they beat. And when Washington was playing at its best, they were a top 10 team. They finished with the best winning percentage in the Pac-12. They returned Michael Penix. Their roster is it's phenomenal. They have great wide receivers, great offensive line, and I think their defense, with how many starters they're set to return, will take a step forward compared to the USC and Oregon defense. Penn State, they lose Sean Clifford, but they return Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, 4 out of their 5 offensive line starters. Their defenses are always solid, and outside of that one game against Michigan, the Penn State defense was consistently one of the best in the country. They hired a new wide receivers coach. They have a deep tight end room. The main question, of course, is James Franklin and quarterback Drew Aller. You'll realize this with these real college football playoff contenders. They still have multiple questions, but they're questions that are fixable, and they often have very good rosters and a good amount of returning production or transfer portal additions on top of them. With Utah, they return quarterback Cameron Rising with Andy Ludwig as the OC and Morgan Scaley as the DC. They have one of the best coordinator duos in the country. Their defense last year was, I think, the best or the second best in the Pac-12. It was either them or Oregon State. And Kyle Whittingham is on a 2-year streak of being the Pac-12 champion. And when you return quarterback Cameron Rising, Jaquindon Jackson at running back is phenomenal. And they return, I think Micah Bernard took his name out of the transfer portal. and is back at Utah. Their trench play is going to be solid. Their defense is going to be solid. It's going to be scrappy. And Utah, they've had 2 10-4 seasons in a row. Can they finally break through? I think they can, but we have to see if they actually will. Florida State and Clemson. Curious case here. Florida State is a team that I look at them and their depth. They're going to have one of the best secondaries in the country. They added Fentrell Cypress from the transfer portal. Jordan Travis returns. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the nation in 2022. Florida State finally came through. They went from a 5-7 season to a 10-3 season. They returned tons of starters. Mike Norvell's offense is finally humming. They had one of the worst rushing defenses in the nation, which of course puffed their secondary stats, but they returned projected first-rounder Jared Verse at D-line. Their defense will take a step up. Their offense will take a step up. Florida State, I think, is poised to continue the amazing momentum they had in November and continue it into this coming season, potentially winning the ACC. And then there's Clemson. Clemson I would have not even put into this category until the hiring of Garrett Riley, which is why I wanted to wait and make this video a few weeks following the final campaign of 2023, which was, of course, the national title game, because then things settled down. The first round of the transfer portals closed. Most of the coaching staff additions or subtractions or changes are done, and Clemson benefited from this. They went from having an offensive staff that was very questionable to, with the addition of one man and the subtraction of another in Brandon Streeter, having one of the best offensive staffs in the country. One that I'm telling you will be better than Alabama's, which will still be one of the best staffs in the country. And I think Tommy Rees, the more I think about it, contrary to one of my recent videos, the more I think about it, it is an underrated hire. And that's where we're going to start off next for the actual national title contenders, is Alabama. Alabama, 2 new coordinators. Their roster is, it's going to have a lot of turnover. Out of all these teams, they're losing by far the most production. Doesn't matter. Best recruiting class by a mile in the 2023 cycle. 9 5-stars. The next 2 best classes in Georgia and Texas had a combined 9 5-star players. 9 5-star players for the Crimson Tide. Got guys like Caleb Downs, for example, who could possibly start as a true freshman. Caden Proctor, offensive tackle they stole from Iowa. Keon Keeley, amazing edge player. And Jalen Milroe, that quarterback. Listen, he can run. He's fast. He can accelerate. And he was kind of thrusted in that starting position when Bryce Young was unexpectedly injured. But with Tommy Rees getting a full preseason to work with him and him getting full preseason reps and opportunities with the first team, and with Ty Simpson competing with him, he could transform into a star. Jalen Milroe can, and be a similar quarterback to what Jalen Hurts was, where you have a lot of that huge rushing threat. And Alabama, too, with Nick Saban, they're always going to be up there, always threatening to be a national title contender. For Georgia, it's simple. They're on a 2-year run of winning it all. They return like half of their O-line production. Brock Bowers comes back. Dejon Edwards, Kendall Milton, they return at running back. And their wide receiver room with Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett is going to be loaded. It's going to be absolutely loaded. And that defense with names like Malachi Starks, they're going to reload too, especially at D-line and linebacker. For Ohio State, it's similar in the sense that they lose a lot on offense, specifically offensive line and quarterback, but they have a reputation at quarterback, so I trust that they'll reload there. Like Georgia, it won't be at the same caliber as the starters that are departing, but it's going to be similar enough to where there won't be a drop-off in the overall tier of team. Ohio State also returns the majority of their defense. They return their entire wide receiver core, which will be the best in the country. And Ryan Day is 45-6 as a head coach. got to stop calling him overrated. I don't know where the notion came that, oh, they're going to go 10-3 or 9-4 next year. Like you're treating Ryan Day exactly like how you and myself included, I was guilty of this. We're treating Kirby Smart before he won a national title. Guy's a winner. He's a winner. He's beaten Clemson, beaten Dabo Swinney, nearly beat him twice. He's played for a national title. He nearly beat Georgia this year when Georgia had the far more complete team, the far better defense, the far better defensive and offensive coaching staff because of how good of a coach Todd Monken is. So, listen, he's a winner, 45-6. The only team holding him back from probably having a national title or at least another playoff win or being 4-0 in Indy is Michigan. And Michigan returns J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. They return 3 guys on the offensive line, 2 of them guards. They'll be the best guard duo in the country in Zach Zinter and Trevor Keegan. They return Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson. On defense, they lose guys, but they return Sainristil and Johnson at secondary. They'll be some of the best secondary players in the country. They add Ernst Hausmann from the transfer portal. Him combined with Junior Colson and Michael Barrett. That will be a 3-headed hydra at linebacker. Michigan is set to play for and potentially win their first national title since 1997. And out of all the teams that I think are real national title contenders, Michigan's had the longest drought. They last won it in 1997, Ohio State in 2014, Georgia in 2022, Alabama in 2020. The Rose Bowl, which I think will be the number 1 versus the number 4 this year, it will be Michigan versus Washington. I think Michigan will be 13-0 and they'll finish as Big Ten champions. I think they will beat Ohio State again because of the home field advantage. I think Michigan and Ohio State are very evenly matched. And I think that Ohio State, what they had at running back, and we'll get to this in a few minutes when I preview their matchup, because yes, I do have them in the playoffs as well. You can probably guess who else I do. But what happened to them at running back was an anomaly. Ohio State will be more physical. They will have a better defense this coming season. Michigan will just improve all around. With what they return at quarterback, running back, O-line, wide receiver, with what they're developing at tight end, the additions they've made in the portal, on defense, how they recruit and develop on defense, this team will be Harbaugh's best ever. They'll win the Big Ten again. They'll be 13-0. This team, I'm telling you, is destined for greatness. And you may want to argue with me, but 7 starters on offense, 8 on defense, I don't think you can argue with that exactly. I don't. They lose 3 on the D-line, and then they lose DJ Turner at secondary. That's it. That is literally it. Their secondary, their linebacker core will be elite, and their D-line will be great. And their O-line will probably be great, probably be elite. Their tight end room, quarterback room, wide receiver room will be good to great. Their running back room will be the best in the country. And with how good I think Penn State will be, with how good I think Ohio State will be, and just, this is also a preview of my way too early top 25 as well. I think the top 4 teams will be in the college football playoff this year, which actually doesn't happen every year. I do think Michigan's the best team in the country currently. Their key position groups, their best areas are running back, offensive line, and linebacker. For Washington, it's not exactly the same story. They don't play football like how Michigan does, but they have success with it. They have less talent. They play in a different climate. They have different kinds of players. They have a completely different kind of head coach. Now, similar to Harbaugh, the result is overall winning, but Kalen DeBoer is new to the Division I FBS level, and at the same time, he kind of brings some of that new energy there with his offense. It's extremely pass heavy. It's also extremely prolific and successful. I think Washington will be 12-1 and they'll finish as Pac-12 champions. I think them and USC will be in the Pac-12 title game, each at 11-1. USC will get destroyed by Utah, even though it's a home game, because Utah just matches up extremely well with them. And then USC will beat Washington in what will be a home game. USC actually they have a tough schedule, but they also, because a lot of the tougher games are in the Coliseum, they have a chance to have a real resume building schedule that isn't as tough as one might think when you look at the numbers and the rankings and all those preseason odds and stuff. Washington returns, I think, around 8 starters on offense and 7 on defense. Michael Penix is the most important one there, along with their wide receivers. Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan. That's one of the best wide receiver cores in the country. I think only Ohio State and Texas have better wide receiver cores, and I don't think Texas has as good of a starting quarterback, as Michael Penix. So that passing offense is going to be humming. It's going to be very much in tune. The deep threat is going to be there. It's going to be very hard to stop these guys on offense. And they've made some nice additions in the portal as well. They just have. At running back, they added Dylan Johnson, running back from Mississippi State, who was, I think, ranked a 91 in the transfer portal, according to 24/7 Sports. Obviously played in an air raid system, but even though he's transferring to a more pass-heavy offense, he's going to be utilized more at Washington than he was at Mississippi State, where Mike Leach, rest in peace to him, just never used the running back position. Washington's their greatest strength areas, their key positions are quarterback, wide receiver, and offensive line. Washington and Michigan, it'll be a Pac-12 Big Ten battle in the Rose Bowl. It'll be entertaining. It'll be fun. I think you'll get to see one of the best secondaries and best wide receiver cores in the nation go toe-to-toe with each other. Michigan's D-line, which from a raw talent perspective is probably more talented than Washington's O-line, so they have the raw talent advantage, but Washington has the veteran advantage when it comes to their O-line facing Michigan's D-line. And I think looking at this game, at the end of the day, I'm picking Michigan to win the Rose Bowl, but this would be a Rose Bowl potentially for the ages here, given Kalen DeBoer being an offensive genius who will find a way to tear apart or to at least gain points and yards on any defense he faces. And Washington's defense, good luck stopping J.J. McCarthy, and especially Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards on the ground. That's the Rose Bowl. On to the Sugar Bowl, which I think, much like 2014, will be an SEC Big Ten affair. Much like that game, it will be high scoring. I think the final score of that game was like 42-35 Ohio State, where Ezekiel Elliott just tore through every Alabama's fans' hopes and dreams of winning the inaugural college football playoff. Georgia, I think they'll be 13-0. They'll repeat as SEC champions. They lose Stetson Bennett. They lose Kenny McIntosh. I know this. They also lose a great majority of their defense, including Keely Ringo, Christopher Smith at secondary, Jalen Carter at D-line. They return the least amount of starters out of all of these teams. Just 5 on offense and 6 on defense. But you know what? They're the most talented team out of these 4 in the playoffs. They're the most talented. Michael Williams at D-line, 5-star. Malachi Starks at free safety, 5-star. A lot of these guys like Javen Bullard, Dalen Everett, another 5-star. Kamari Lassiter, Chaz Chambliss, Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse. These players on this Georgia defense, coached by Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp, we all know the real mastermind behind these defenses is Kirby Smart. they reload. You will not. You will not see this defense take more than a few inches of a step back. You won't, even with all that departing talent, even with all of that. And an offense, as long as Todd Monken stays at Georgia, as long as he stays at Georgia, they're going to be great on offense. Todd Monken is a schemer. He's one of the best offensive coordinators in the country, and he's done a darn good job at coaching quarterbacks at Georgia, which when Jake Fromm was there, big-time weakness under Kirby Smart. Jake Fromm was a guy who really was made by his supporting cast and did well in his first year or two, but in 2019, especially with the horrendous offensive coordinator job by James Coley, took a deep nosedive. It took him a year in 2020 to get things worked out between Stetson Bennett and JT Daniels, but from 2021 to now, Todd Monken has done an amazing job with Georgia's offense. He's modernized it. He's taken it to a top 10, top 5 level year in, year out. With Xavier Truss returning, along with Cedric Van Pran, there is that interior of that Georgia D-line that will have some leadership and veteranacy to provide for a lot of newcomers. Carson Beck looks to be the projected starter at quarterback, though Brock Vandegrift and Gunnar Stockton will certainly compete with him. Brock Bowers, Oscar Delp look to be the nation's best tight end duo. Georgia's key position groups, tight end, D-line, linebacker. They lost a lot on the latter too, but I think they'll plug and play there. They like to rotate. They like to give guys situational opportunities to play to their strengths just because the insane amount of depth they have on defense. I don't think that defense is going anywhere. I hate to say it, and I do because I don't like the SEC, but that defense, at least in the front seven, is not going anywhere. So Georgia, 13-0, just like Michigan, just like the two of them this past season, they'll finish as their respective conference champions. Ohio State will be 11-1 and finish second in the Big Ten East, losing their final game to Michigan, just like last year. However, they returned 7 starters on both offense and defense. I think that with JT Tuimoloau returning, and, he had to because he only played in college for 2 years, but a player with that much upside, and then you have another unicorn, albeit one who is much more exposed, who's much more stable, who has much more of an impact, but a guy who has that same upside in Marvin Harrison Jr., Ohio State could have multiple unicorns on one singular team, which doesn't happen all that often. You know what happened with Georgia in 2021, all the first-rounders they had on that defense? It might even somewhat be the case for this past year's Georgia defense, though I think it was more Georgia's offense rather than their defense, and I think the Georgia-Ohio State matchup in 2022 showed that it was more Stetson Bennett and Georgia's offense and Todd Monken that won them the national title than their defense this past season. But Ohio State, JT Tuimoloau, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, Jack Sawyer, Donovan Jackson, guard. I just named multiple 5-stars. Ohio State and Georgia are the most talented teams by team talent composite, by recruiting, by raw high school numbers that are in my projected 4-team playoff. So this game right here, this Sugar Bowl, would be a talent fest. And Ohio State returns so much talent, it's unreal. They have a veteranacy edge over Georgia. Their talent, though Georgia slightly edges Ohio State, is overall the same. Ohio State has more offensive talent. Georgia's is more defense. But one more thing I have to mention before I, of course, name the obvious position groups is that Ohio State, they bring in Jahad Carter from Syracuse. They bring in Igbinosun from Ole Miss, so their secondary is going to be shored up, and that was their weakest unit by far last season. They returned Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers. They got Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau back. Michael Hall, Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, very underrated defensive tackle unit. Ohio State's offense is still going to be great. And I think that Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams, when healthy, do have the potential to be one of the nation's best running back duos. And including Dallin Hayden, Ohio State's running back room by sheer depth might be the best in the nation. But what if we're focusing on the wrong thing with Ohio State? Jim Knowles will be in year 2. Basically, the entire defensive staff for Ohio State will be in year 2. And returning 7 starters on defense, or 7 guys who've had starting opportunities on defense, Lathan Ransom, Denzel Burke, Tommy Eichenberg, Steele Chambers, the majority of the D-line that had significant playing time, minus Zach Harrison, is back. This defense for Ohio State's going to take a huge step forward. I'm telling you right now. And I think that, along with the fact that Ryan Day is a guru on offense, that Ryan Day in this hypothetical rematch, I think they'd have the revenge arc on their side. I think Ohio State will win this game. And that brings us to what I feel like the nation, to a certain degree, though the games play themselves, was robbed of this past season. Ohio State and Michigan return so much of their production. They have so many great players, so many great coaches, that I think they are destined to face off for the national title. Now, again, this opinion is subject to change. This is a February college football playoff prediction. Let's go extreme. J.J. McCarthy or Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards, like some important Michigan player or some important Ohio State player, like loses a leg and they can't play for the year. Well, then, of course, there are going to be, things that change, because for any team, I don't care if it's Georgia or Alabama, you lose your best player for the season, that changes things. It really does change things. Like what happened to Michigan, where they lost Blake Corum and still beat Ohio State, is somewhat of an anomaly, if we're being honest here. It is somewhat of an anomaly. Like, you look at Alabama, and they beat Georgia when they had a healthy wide receiver core in 2021. They lost their 2 best wide receivers, and that was a game changer. So this opinion is subject to change. So don't lose your minds over the fact that I have 2 Big Ten teams fighting for the national title. But with the amount of production they return, the amount of talent they return, the fact that these 2 teams are strategically using the transfer portal to fill in their needs, to target their weaknesses. Look, Michigan will have the best running back and linebacker room in the nation. Ohio State will have the best wide receiver room in the nation. These teams each have specific units that will be number 1, that will be second to none in the country. For Ohio State, it's their wide receiver room. It's their passing game, potentially overall. Washington could compete with that too. For Michigan, it'll be their linebacker room, and more importantly than that, it will be their rushing attack and running back room. And maybe the offensive line can contend for having the best O-line again. And for Ohio State, maybe their D-line, with the upside that they have in a guy like JT Tuimoloau, with the promise we've seen in Mike Hall and Tyleik Williams and Jack Sawyer, maybe they could even contend on that portion for D-line. But those 2 rooms for those 2 teams, just because of some of the talent they've lost and or some of the questions they've had at those positions, specifically talking about Ohio State with questions at D-line, I'm not as comfortable making those broad stroke statements there. Both return production. The Wolverines have 75% of their 2 deep returning. The Buckeyes are loaded with 5 stars, and they return 14 starters. And Michigan will be physical in the trenches. They'll have a physical run game, but they'll be fast everywhere else. Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, those are fast players. J.J. McCarthy is Michigan's best quarterback, both from an arm angle, from a mobility angle, and heck, in 2023, maybe even from a decision-making angle, could be the best quarterback in the Jim Harbaugh era at Michigan. With Sanders still, look at the Ohio State game. He's speedy. He's fast. Will Johnson is built like an NFL corner. Michigan has talent. They have physicality. They also have speed. Ohio State, we know they've had speed. That's never been Ohio State's problem, especially in the Ryan Day era. But physicality has. But I think their defense is trending up. I think they're getting tougher. And I think Ohio State will reload at quarterback. I don't get where this narrative is, where Kyle McCord and Devin Brown are where they're going to be falling off heavily in production at quarterback because of the loss of CJ Stroud. Like CJ Stroud, fantastic player, elite quarterback, but make no mistake about it, Ohio State's a quarterback factory under Ryan Day. They're a quarterback factory. This is going to be tough to say. And a lot of it has to do with matchups and the fact that Michigan, the style of ball they play, they're meant and they're built to beat Ohio State. And with how Ohio State showed up in the past, 2 games, I'd have to pick Michigan to win a rematch just because of the matchup. But it is hard to beat a team twice in the span of a month. So I don't have a score prediction for this one, or I'm not going to go in detail with a prediction for this one. Especially because, again, it's a way too early college football playoff prediction. Depending on certain things that happen, this would be very unlikely because I'm confident Michigan, Ohio State, and Georgia, those are the 3 teams that I'm very confident will make it. But if tons of crazy things happen, the playoff field could look nearly totally different from a preseason prediction angle come this summer. That's all I have to say in this long but quality content video. Thank you guys for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Click the notification bell and comment your thoughts on my way too early college football playoff predictions down below. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye.